Good morning, my friends. Welcome to another installment of Breakfast with the Fat Man. Right? Yeah. I'm gonna touch on a topic that's of interest to me. I've always been a fan of J.R.R. Tolkien. One of the reasons I'm doing this long, extensive review of the Middle-earth role-playing game system because I enjoyed not just the game system itself and the game material, the world it sets in, because it helps me have a deeper understanding and picture in my mind what uh, it looked like in the stories of the novels of the immortal bard, Mr. Tolkien. One of the subjects that in over the years, when I've talked to other people about Aragon or Strider, and is his status as a ranger. Now, most of us as gamers and stuff, we immediately assume or connect the concept of him being the character class ranger, which is true. He fits all the requirements to be that class, and it can be argued that that is his primary game class. As a matter of fact, even in my book I got here, the Rangers of the North, Arthedain, it has his stats. His stats also show up in the couple of the compendiums of famous people, and they do list him as a ranger. Now, he is a king, a warrior, a trained fighter. He is a bit of a mystic. He has base knowledge of magic and the understanding of how it's supposed to work. The same, he has some clerical uh, kind of connection because of his status, his connection to not the religion of the land, so to speak, but the premise of the unbroken line is of kings is almost a religious bent to the right people. So he actually has more of a jack of all trades set of skill sets and abilities and training. And then, so we would really consider him a multi-class in some aspects. But the ranger, where the real difference sets here is that while you can argue that as a player class, as a character, as a class, that he would be a ranger, the truth is that it is a political position. Why is the fact that he is a ranger so important? Okay, if you look at the history of the on Arnor and Gondor, the founding of the two kingdoms, they're of Nurmor before that. And the Rangers have actually been a military caste or military sub branch that have been in existence for better part of 3,000 years. Just they serve the purpose of the atypical ranger, the forward scout, so to speak, the person who specializes in knowing the lay of the land and how to operate within the wilderness that often the military has to send forces into. This makes them very valuable people. But it is a connectivity. When Arnor disintegrated, when its last king made the mistake of bequeathing the individual kinglets to his sons and starting the basically a miniature kinstripe of civil war between these three splinter kingdoms that eventually allowed the Witch King Agmar and Sauron's forces to further weaken them, splitting them up, eventually eating them up, individually. So he was able to capture Ritter early on, and then defeat Cardolan because Cardolan couldn't stand by itself, and then eventually Arthedain. And at the end of the day, the fact that Aragon can lay title to being a ranger is very, very politically important in the scheme of things. It's Bromir's attitude when he discovers that Aragon is the direct descendant of Isildur and Eladel, that who are you to come out now from this houseless waste in the north, this failed kingdom, sister kingdom of Gondor, and lay claim to the throne of my forefathers, coming down here to supplement my father and my family lineage as being stewards. And what's your legal claim? Anybody can claim to have a bloodline, and even though having Elrod as a supporting person who backs your claim, it's not enough. It's more important to the average Gondorian or Arnorian at this point, in the past, to know that you may be the blood descendant of nobility or royalty, but the fact that you've served in service for the people helps give you a more legitimizes Aragon's claim to the throne. Now, once again, when Arthedain falls, the Witch King quits the field and then quits Angmar altogether. Angmar becomes a defunct kingdom. So in a way, not only does Arnor cease to exist as a kingdom, but Angmar also ceased to exist after the final battle of Fornasain and when the Elves of Gilgalad and the Gondorian army show up too late to save the Arthedain main force. Now, as a kingdom, most of the Arthedain's fighting nobility and true blood Numerian soldiers are massacred, killed in this final battle. And that doesn't mean that as a kingdom it completely dissolved and ceased to exist, because you have, thousands of commoner Dunedain and even tens of thousands of non-Dunedain subjects that still exist. Now, they don't just all up and dig their own holes and bury themselves, and they don't all migrate to Gondor immediately. Over time, that is probably what happened. As Arnor ceased to exist as a political body, as a governing, kingdom, its sole remaining splinter kingdom, Arthedain, follows suit. Now we have no structure, no government, and the Gondorian nobility is not willing, which is never really explained why that was, why some members of, you got to figure some of the Arnorian descendants that went south might have come back north to try to reestablish the kingdom. And who knows, maybe they attempted, but it never took root. It was doomed until the beginning of the Fourth Age, when Aragon, Isildur's heir, is recrowned and then comes back north and reestablishes Arnor as a kingdom. It's fated. So the fact that he is a ranger is important, because of all the government and political bodies that existed that made up the structure that supports the kingdom. When they disintegrated, they fell apart, they disbanded, they were scattered to the four winds, with the exception of the Rangers. The Rangers remained, and the Ranger Corps. This would be like the America falling apart, the World War III tears it apart, and the Marine Corps remains solid, and through its actions continues to perpetrate this ghost of a government structure, this legitimacy that America, while on its back and gasping for breath, is not completely defunct, because they have the spirit de corps to go around and battle the forces that of evil, or the forces that seek to feast on the corpse of the country, and to try to picture a future where the great country as we know it is reborn. So the fact that the Rangers are a military body with a neo-political connectivity makes this very important in aspect of legitimacy for Aragon. Now, they don't do this justice to this in the movies, because there's just not enough time and space to create everything. it is what it is. I can argue that till all day long that they left a lot of good stuff out if you go by the book. But that's typical. That's always when I always ask people when they say, "Oh, this is a great book," or "It was a good movie," and I'll say, "Yeah, was the movie based on the book, or was the book based on the movie?" And then a lot of people get what? Well, look, anytime you have a book that's written based on a movie, it's pretty much verbatim how the movie plays out. The dialogue, the story, everything is exact the way the movie is. Classic Star Wars, okay? George Lucas wrote the manuscript for Star Wars, but the novel that came out after the movie is exactly the same as the movie. There's no changes, there's no wider realm, there's no more information in it. On the other hand, in Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien made some very deep novels, very thick novels that you can't translate fully into a full-length movie. Even as it was, Peter Jackson created some movies that were in upwards of 3 hours long, which in the cinematic world today, that's very thick, very lengthy, and very expensive. That's one of the reasons he had so much trouble getting it produced in the beginning. There was a lot of doubt whether or not he could pull it off well, and whether it would be successful enough to sustain itself. The minute it made billions, the first movie, he had no trouble getting big name, Hollywood wanting to support him at that point, but he didn't need them. So you can look up his own Peter Jackson's journey to creating the first Lord of the Rings movie to see what I'm talking about. Anyway, so in the books, there's at the battle of Horn's Deep, they take great liberty there because the elves do not show up at the Battle of Helm's Deep. That is a solely human battle. But what we get is a force of rangers that come out of the north with the only elves present is Elrod's two twin sons, and so we got the Great Company that rides down out of the south, out of the north, to join Aragon in his quest to gain the throne of Gondor. And this is a military structured body. It's a company, and it's based solely on the Ranger Corps that protected what few descendants of the Arthedain and Arnorian people who did remain in the north. There were small enclaves of them, small little villages and towns that don't make it in the movies. They don't make it in the books, but it's implied that they're there. It's in Tolkien's backwork, as well as, of course, heavily focused in these things, which makes sense, right? There was a small cater. I think one scene in the first Lord of the Rings movie is where it's the Hobbit, when the dwarves stop at what looks like a ruined farm, and Gandalf makes a comment. I knew these people, and what I think that was a Numorian farmstead, one of those remnants, because Aragon had to have a family. He had to be descendant from a pure, unbroken bloodline, which meant there has to be more Arnorians still floating around. They didn't all just belly up and die or float away or move out. So they dwindled to a very, introspective, very quiet group of people, but there's probably a better part of 1,000 or more of them still in existence. You need this breeding body of purebloods to still be viable. Otherwise, his claim is further diminished to the point where he would have no claim. That's just the truth. Now, he was raised in Rivendell, but the truth is there's no sign that there's a huge Numorian population base living with the elves, and they wouldn't do that. They would remain separate from themselves. But obviously, he had a father and a grandfather, and so on and so forth, because they mention his lineage several times, the son of the son of. And so they had to be, they had to have wives and kin, and they still exist. Some of them went south to Gondor, married, and came back north. Some of them married locals, but were careful to keep it within the bloodline, to keep it solid. It was important. So you get this military structure of Arthedain, of Arnor, the only sole remaining government body that exists with any legitimacy is the Rangers, as this military corps, as this group of protectors, and they continue to do what they were originally intended to do. What do? They protect the boundaries. Mostly, they protect the halflings in the Shire. They kind of smile and grin at the foolishness of these little people, but they take comfort in the fact that here's at least one small corner of the world that's not troubled by the blight and the darkness that's approaching, and it's important to them that it stay that way. It's also important because, oddly enough, the hobbits were, and it talks about this in this particular book, of how they established the Shire, and that the Shire is actually a political appointed kingdom, a sub-kingdom. There's a reason why Pippin is the son of the Thane. He was his family's bloodline is appointed caretakers by one of the kings of Arthanate. So there's a connectivity here. And then I imagine that there's some Numerians still living in Bree and here and scattered about here and there. So the fact that they still exist. Now we go down south. Now in the latter movies, we run into Bramir's younger brother, Famirier. And what is Famirier? He's a ranger. They briefly touch on it, but that's the truth. That's why him and his company were in the area where they encountered Frodo and Sam on their journey to Mordor. Is because they were up there spying on and harassing the Sauron's man forces as they were traveling further north to join the gathering at Mordor. And so what is he doing? He's leading the atypical ranger military body. They've got the attire, they blend in with the environment. They're more about ranged weapons and sniping from afar than engaging in front-on conflict. Although they do that, we see that later in Osgiliath, and they actually almost get their butt handed to them when they're up against the main frontline orc contingents. The fact of the matter, though, is it further legitimizes, if you don't look at it from a broader perspective, Vermeer and his fellow Rangers legitimize Aragon as a Ranger and his fellow Rangers. The fact that they're Gondorian Rangers versus Arnorian Rangers makes no difference. It just proves that there's this political connection for Aragon. He has a legitimate political tie to the defunct kingdom in the north. And the fact that the kingdom itself is defunct, but not totally destroyed, not totally forgotten. The fact is that they've got hundreds of years worth of martial tradition of defending and protecting their turf as best they could with the very limited resources they had available, and heavily assistance from the elves. Did they master marshal any great formations and march off into some battle? No, because they don't have the numbers for it. But being able to be this small hit and run protective body of people made this important contribution to Aragon's legitimacy. There you go. That's why it's not just being a character class in this case. In this case, being a ranger is a political and very necessary component of what makes Aragon Aragon. That's my 2 cents on that. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys' watching my videos, and value all of your opinions, whether you agree with me or don't agree with me. If you like the video, click and join. Tell your friends. Make fun of it. Tell your friends. Whatever works for you. Till the next one.